Welcome to Live Free, Ride Free, where we talk to people who have lived self-actualized lives on their own terms and find out how they got there, what they do, how we can get there, what we can learn from them, how to live our best lives, find our own definition of success, and most importantly, find joy. I'm your host, Rupert Isaacson, New York Times best-selling author of The Horse Boy, founder of New Trails Learning Systems and LongRideHome.com. You can find details of all our programs and shows on rupertisaacson.com.
Welcome back to Live Free, Ride Free, where we talk to people who are living and have lived and continue to live self-actualized lives. What can we learn from them? How do they do it? How can they mentor us? How can we do it? It's always worth giving it up to the mentors. We have one today, someone rather extraordinary. We've got Sammy Leslie. You probably don't know who Sammy Leslie is, because Sammy Leslie is one of those people who likes to do it from behind the scenes. And I had to kind of put a lasso around her and pull her a little bit forward. She's now sitting in her garden to talk to us. We're very lucky to have her. Sammy runs Castle Leslie. Castle Leslie is, on the face of it, a luxury, super luxury resort hotel experience thing, legendary thing really in Ireland, which the great and the good and the celebs of this world go to, and also equestrians and also ordinary people like you and I. And it seems to run flawlessly. It seems that you arrive at this place and you suddenly get to kind of live the baronial life, at least for an hour or two or a day or two or a month or a week or two. It's Sammy who makes this experience possible, Sammy Leslie. It's not easy. Sammy has had all kinds of challenges in her life and yet manages to present a dream of how life should be to anyone who walks or drives through the gates of Castle Leslie. It doesn't matter whether they're coming in with a lot of money. It doesn't matter if they're just coming in for a drink at the bar. Everyone is treated the same. Everyone is treated like a lord or a lady. It's an extraordinary experience. It takes an enormous amount of skill to put this together. And it's something that sort of sets people free. I think anyone I've spoken to who's come away from an experience at Castle Leslie has said, this was a seminal experience in inspiration and how the relationship between human and landscape and history and mythology and all of these things have been sort of rolled into one experience seemingly seamlessly. And it's really all down to one person, Sammy Leslie. So I want to know how she does it. And I want to know how we can learn to do similar things in our lives. So buckle up, because this is a treat. Sammy, welcome to Live Free, Ride Free.
Thank you. Lovely to hear you.
Can you tell us who you are and why you are in this position doing this stuff?
That's always the most terrible question. I have no idea who I am or what I do. I just grew up with a very simple ethos is of all you can do in life is the best with what you have and by those around you. And it doesn't matter if all you got is in life is one bucket of water that which could save somebody's life or grows some very valuable food, or you've got a lot. It's just about understanding what you have and how you do the best. We live in a very interconnected world, or we should live in a very interconnected world. And over the last couple of decades, it's just become so siloed. Nature's over there, and people are over there, and buildings are over here, and history's over there, and smart's over there, and climate change is something we don't even talk about. And I mean, here we really talk about two things, are fascinated by two things: biodiversity, which is the wonderful, complex, interwoven relationships of nature, and neurodiversity, in the fact that we all have brains and we all process information differently. And, a same thing, a whole series of wonderful, interwoven, complex relationships. I don't think you can silo people and place and nature and planet without detrimental effects. So, yeah, I suppose part of my family are American, and through the Jeromes and the Ides. They're supposed to be Sioux and Iroquois descent. And when we were children, we grew up very much on the side of First Nation or Native or Indigenous American people. And we just wanted to kick the shit out of the cowboys. Sorry, I'm not allowed to say that probably. So we were always told to think a bit deeper and look a bit further and gently question everything, because life is not the series of black and white binary boxes we're trying to put it into. And it's not working, as we can tell.
So you're coming out of a background with some roots in Native America, yet there you are sitting in County Monaghan in Ireland, on the border between North and Southern Ireland, running this vast estate and shouldering all the responsibilities that come with it, because it's a working estate and it's a hotel and it's a farm and it's all of these things. As far as I know, you weren't supposed to be in this position. Tell us the story. Where were you born? How were you born? How did you end up doing this?
I am the mistress's illegitimate child, if you want to put labels on people. I'm very proud of it. You know, my mum and dad absolutely fell in love. My dad, an amazing first wife, Agnes Burnell, Hungarian German Jew, with her mum fled Berlin just about one of the last sort of trains to get out before things got really closed down. And an awful lot of their family, it didn't get down or didn't get out. So always grew up with that sort of understanding of the desperate cruelty that humans can reflect or can inflict on fellow human beings. And my mum and dad were not supposed to be, and I wasn't supposed to be either. And dad went to see a psychic with mum, and the psychic turned around and went, "Hello, Mr. Leslie. Yeah, another child on the way, little brown-eyed girl." And mum was blonde and blue-eyed. And dad was like, "Oh, please, is it my wife or my mistress that are pregnant? What's happening here?" And I came along. So certainly a child that wasn't supposed to be, but I can totally understand if my mother had made other choices. I've always been too terrified to have children. Thought absolutely terrifies me. So yes, I was not the expected one to do this. And I just fell in love with place here. It is one of the most magical places on the planet. There's this amazing little corner of Ireland that was carved out by the glaciers with glittering lakes and wonderful woodlands. And as children, we were feral children. I mean, we left in the morning and we probably grabbed a head collar or a bridle and grabbed a pony, which was normally a scruffy rescue from somewhere. And we probably had a bit of a packed lunch somewhere, and we literally just disappeared. And as long as we were home before dark and there was not too much blood and preferably no broken bones, nobody really noticed or probably cared. It was an absolute idyllic childhood, being allowed to be that free range in nature. And I think that's one of
that wasn't normal for the children of the landed gentry. What one knows of that background is that one was required usually to have a loyalty first to caste, to clan, and then after that to family, and then after, personal relationships. No, not so much. You seem to have come out of something very, very different there.
My dad is probably, he's the third, but he's actually the fourth child. The third child was stillborn and is buried under a tree in Talbot Great Park in London because he was unbaptized, so therefore there was nowhere to bury him. So he again grew up quite free range as such. I think his father had sort of given up and he was handed over to a series of nannies. And his hair was dyed blonde until he was about 5. And nobody noticed, because if you were a nanny in Hyde Park, you were much higher status. Well, first to have the eldest boy, preferably blonde as well. And if you couldn't have that, you had a blonde child. And literally dad's hair was dyed blonde for the first 5 years of his life and nobody noticed. So,
and that was in London?
Annie's. Yeah, he grew up, he was born in 1921, so it was just after the First World War. And I think he had a little bit of free-range childhood in many ways as well, because, the grown-ups were tired and busy at that point. Remember, in our world, of big old houses, having a relationship with your child before they're 7, can hold a conversation, mix a fold of lettuce leaf with one, try this again, having a relationship with a child before the age of 7, when they're supposed to be able to, read the newspaper, fold a lettuce leaf with a fork, and mix a good dry martini, it wasn't something that one did, really.
No.
They were kind of put up with nannies until that point, and they could be amazing, kind, wonderful people, or desperately cruel. And one of Dad's was quite cruel. For her, potty training was tying. If he wet himself, she would tie the wet nappy to his face and make him stand in the corner. But that was sort of improving, and
Character
a good
building.
thing. Yeah,
That was his
character
mother.
building.
That was your grandmother.
No, that was his nanny.
Oh, that was his nanny. Okay, gosh, ouch.
Yeah, his mother
Um,
was, and it's the type of thing somebody be in jail for now.
Indeed.
Uh,
No,
but
absolutely,
then
indeed.
character building, as you quite rightly say,
Mm,
could
Go
not
ahead.
expect.
So how did he then translate from this neglected, rather abusive upbringing in London to this extraordinary, wild and magical estate in Ireland?
Well, this was where they came in the summer. It was too cold, really, in the winter. And they came here for summer and holidays, and he absolutely loved it. And again, kind of just went feral and disappeared off into the woods and out in the lake fishing and out swimming and up trees and, on ponies and down to the farm and, very much outside and a nature lover and really connected with the nature. And I think that's when he really fell in love with spiritualism and that sort of, through the American side of the family, that sort of, First Nation spiritualism and connection to land.
So your father, at what point did he then decide to just live at Castle Leslie and immerse himself in that landscape? Then how did you come along?
Well, if you go back to 1914 when the eldest boy was shot, the second boy didn't want it. He wanted to become a priest. The third boy had polio. So then it was sort of put into an estate company to try and protect it. And then the next generation, my aunt was born in 1912, but she was a girl. And I was in my 40s before I realized she was the eldest child because the next one, Uncle Jack, was a boy. So I assumed he was the eldest. But he'd been a prisoner of war for 5 years and really couldn't cope with the sort of stresses of running the place. And it was just known as the hot potato because nobody really wanted it. So then it went to my dad, picked up the pieces and said, I'll take it on. And then I'm the fifth of 6 kids. And while everybody loves and adores it, the reality of 4-letter words like work and bill and, roof and, things
Don't
that need
scare
to
me
be.
now with these words. So
I love 4-letter words. There's lots of good ones. But you see, at the end of the day, people should follow their passion in life and their career and what they want to do and not do what the world tells them they should do because they're just going to be miserable for life.
So did your dad, it sounds like he managed to break free from that kind of tying diapers to your face type stringent upbringing. And he didn't inflict that on you or his other children, it seems. Can you describe what the culture at Castle Leslie was when you were a girl growing up? How was it? What was going on there?
Well, Dad I suppose he found his wings literally when he went into the RAF at 19 and got away, went through the war and got away from the constraints of family as such. And then he went off and became a filmmaker and music maker in London. And then he came home and took over and he started a nightclub here in the 60s and then a hippie colony. So some of my nannies growing up, Babonniere, and, would have been part of the hippie colony. So it was quite sort of free thinking in a very, the Catholic Church in Ireland was not a kind church. And as we know, so many horror stories are unfolding all the time. And he stayed a million miles away from organized religion and just was quite a free spirit. And most importantly, he absolutely loved his horses.
Okay, tell us about the relationship of Castle Leslie and horses.
Oh, they've always, since we rescued Margaret Queen of Scots in the 1000s on the back of a horse, which is how we ended up from Hungary into Scotland and eventually here.
Whoa! Say that again slowly.
Bartholomew Leslie came over as a mercenary to bring a young girl over to marry King Malcolm of Scotland. Her name was Margaret. And at some point he had to rescue her from a castle that was being besieged. and he made a belt with 3 buckles, and he threw her on the back of the horse, and he shouted, "Grip fast the buckle," and buggered off across the countryside. And when she became queen, she gave us a crest with 3 buckles and then granted him all the land for a mile around where his horse needed to stop to rest. And he rode west. I think he exhausted 5 horses.
She became Queen of Scotland.
Yeah.
But and then allotted him land in Northern Ireland.
No, in Scotland.
In Scotland. Okay. Okay, keep going.
Rural in those days. And then in the 1600s, one of them was a bishop, and he was a bit feisty, and they kept moving him around the place. He lived to the grand old age of, he was in his 100th year when he died. And he got moved over here, and he fought Cromwell and then wrote the Restoration of the King. And when he was offered the Archbishop of Canterbury as a reward, he went, no. There's an old church and a lake in the edge of my diocese. I just want to settle there. So he fell in love in the 1660s with here, and that incredible light over that beautiful lake, and bought the estate of Ridgeways for £2,000. It's a lot of money.
So yes, in those days, an unthinkable amount of money. Okay, so you grew up as the child of a hippie commune run by an aristo who had a mistress who didn't quite mean to get pregnant, did. And then you came along and managed to grow up feral in this amazing place with all this history. Did you ever imagine you'd end up having to run the show? I presume that you must have seen as you grew up, despite it being feral, despite being able to take ponies and disparities, you must have seen it was a lot of work to run a place like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So there was a sort of wonderful freedom of being feral around the estate. There was the incredible and probably the most amazing privilege of the kitchen table. And, we were encouraged to sit and talk and ask questions to anybody that was there. And the kitchen table was always this amazing mix of people from all walks of life. And what was the question?
The question was, did you ever, as you were a kid, imagine that you would end up running the place? And did you have a sense of, as a kid, just the sheer amount of effort it takes to run a place like that?
Well, so there was the feral childhood, the incredible privilege of the kitchen table, and anybody and everybody that you met. And you were allowed to ask questions and, to ask people about different religions and viewpoints. And on the outside, while inside the house was very open-minded, outside the troubles were picking up speed.
Okay.
And that another sort of 30-something years. So no, I just always loved the place and wanted to do it, and nobody else really seemed that interested. I mean, there's interest, but there's rolling up your sleeves and doing the 4-letter word bit.
Now, tell us about the troubles. So not everyone who's listening to this knows what the troubles were. We did interview over on our Equine Assisted World podcast, Terry Brosnan, who also grew up in the troubles. Yeah. Tell us about the troubles. What were the troubles and how did they affect your place?
It started out as civil rights, and because it was a very unfair society, Catholics were second-rate citizens, and it was very unbalanced. And then it grew legs, and violence became the normal way of dealing with things, and tit for tat, and it became very divisive and divided people and communities, and raged for about 30-something years with the loss of about 3,500 lives, and probably 10, 20 times of that people seriously injured and traumatized.
Right. So you were growing up in this beautiful place, but right on the border of Northern and Southern Ireland there. How did the troubles, the Protestant Catholic troubles, seep into that magical world?
It was very funny because I'm from a family of 8 faiths and probably as many nationalities. There's still a few question marks. So we grew up in a world that was very open and eclectic and multi-faith, multiracial. And then you walked out the door and you went, are they going to like me because they think I'm Catholic and hate me because they think I'm English Protestant? Or are they going to love me because of the Churchill-Wellington connection and they think I'm English Protestant and hate me because they think I'm Catholic? In fact, I'm neither of the above. So you're always doing this dance trying to figure out. You had to be incredibly careful about what you said to who, and because somebody would pigeonhole you in one side or the other. So it was an interesting time. Yeah, bias.
Did violence creep onto the estate itself?
Not really. We were very lucky. I mean, there were definitely neighbors where, there were horrendous murders and houses burnt and bombs and yeah, n- very unpleasant things. But
What do
in
you
re-
think? What do you think made Castle Leslie a haven? Why didn't the troubles spill onto the estate?
I think because over the generations, they've always made a really interesting women over the years. Not the diminutive long legs, fresh eggs need apply, breeding machines. So Christina Leslie was a widow in 1940 and with children from her husband's first marriage and their marriage. So I think she had 7 or 9 children under the age of 16. And she ran the estate and she did an awful lot of good work. And she did the best she could in really desperate circumstances, and there were desperate landowners and people who just never even came to Ireland. They had no understanding of the land. They had no understanding of the poverty and the hunger. And about a third of estates went bankrupt. About a third of estates didn't care. And then there was a cohort of them that really wanted to try and do the right thing. And she was certainly up there with them. And we've done a lot of research into, her life and her work. And she was an incredible person. I mean, this is back to the terrible dangers of monocultures. Potato was a monoculture. It was an incredible food. Potatoes and buttermilk are a perfect protein. It was the highest food value per acre of anything grown. It made a lot of sense in so many ways, but monoculture leaves you very vulnerable.
So you're saying, if I'm getting my history right, that there was a history in the estate of when troubled times happened, like the Irish potato famine, the people of Castle Leslie, in particular, the women of Castle Leslie, were seen to have stepped up to help the community. It did that, but that was, a good 100 years or 120 years before the troubles, of the 1970s to 80s and so on. Why would the good works of a previous generation, several generations back, matter to the generation fighting the troubles? What?
Because it was recent history in so many ways. It so changed the country in so many ways. Desperate loss of life, desperate immigration, awful things happened in so many different ways. So no, it was very recent history in so many ways.
Okay, so people were still feeling the potato famine 120 years later and saying, well, because the Leslie family did the right thing and fed people, we're not going to go there and burn that house down. Basically, is that more or less what it was?
Yep.
Or?
The first time houses were burnt was the 1920s after Ireland got independence. So they had a whole spate of burning. They burnt about 400 houses.
Yeah.
And suppose people came to burn it and people were stopped burning it. So yeah, it would have been part of it. Also, my grandfather had become a Catholic. He'd stood for the national seat in Derry and spoke as a Gaeilgeoir. He spoke fluent Irish, part of the Irish Language Commission. So, but his first cousin was Winston Churchill. So you had this real sort of dichotomy of lots of people on different sides. So I would hope to think, because obviously I wasn't around at the time, that, it's because they were reasonable people and tried to do the right thing. In the 1790s, we had a thing called the Act of Union, which was trying to get rid of the Irish Parliament because it was becoming too powerful. So we did two things. We tried to put a bill to Parliament that absentee landlords pay higher taxes. If they weren't going to live in Ireland and work their land and be part of it, they should pay a much higher tax that stayed in Ireland. That went down like a fart in a spacesuit. And then in the Act of Union, they were offered £10,000 and an earldom to vote to get rid of the Irish Parliament. And they went, no, stuff it. So I think in their own way, they've tried to, do the right thing by those around them. And by here, it would have been very easy to take. And there's a whole series of a lot of research on what they call the Castlereagh bribes and who took the bribes. And, politics at the time was who could pay who could bribe who.
Yeah, yeah. That was Georgian politics. I don't think much has changed. But so basically, it seems that the Leslie family then seems to have had an unusually good relationship through massive political upheavals and violence with
I think
the local community.
I think if you look at the original estates that are still here, and there's probably only 12 or 15 sort of on this sort of scale, they probably were all here because they wanted to do the right thing through the generations. Yeah, I mean, it would, even, the last round, it would be easier to sort of sell and bugger off, but that just wouldn't be the right thing to do.
So how aware of all that were you growing up as a child you must have learned, did you learn all this later, or was all this history imparted to you
Oh,
as part of your feral childhood? You sort of, you're,
it was a real dichotomy. And yes, you learned, well, you used to do tours of the house. You got money off tourists if you did it. But you learned all the history and you learned all the paintings. You learned who everybody was. And yeah, that we're all just fellow human beings on this planet.
yeah, yeah.
No, that's, uh, yeah, all trying to.
Yeah, no, it's an extraordinary corner of the world in so many ways, because it's so magical, it's so beautiful, it's so wild, and at the same time, it's so steeped in the messinesses of the realities of what humans get into with each other. And yet there the estate has stood, and there it still is. Something I know about estates is that they generally don't make money and often end up getting sold. Your dad was a hippie. He had the hippie commune, as you said, the 4-letter word, work bills, that sort of thing. Not perhaps the most popular.
Oh, he worked, he paid bills, and he tried to keep the roof on. But was quite visionary in what he wanted to do. With an amazing, very beautifully designed sort of hotel that looked like the hanging gardens of Babylon, and an amazing golf course, and all of the rest. And he had all sorts of backers and plans down, and was sort of heading off down that road when the troubles hit. They were bulldozing the land for the foundations for different buildings.
Okay, so your dad actually had the idea to get into tourism, and then the troubles hit and put the kibosh on that.
Yeah, two things: tourism and nature reserves, as they were called in those days. Which, of course, why do you want to protect nature? There's so much, but it doesn't really make a difference. So yeah, he had an awful lot of vision. I mean, he didn't have the sort of business skills, but necessary that we would now. But where did you learn them? Remember, they had no education. He had a year in university, and then off to the RAF.
Mhm.
It was, the world. The amount of courses and support we have to nurture young businesses and entrepreneurs now is fabulous. In his day, there was absolutely nothing, and everybody was out to try and fleece you. Everybody was
Yeah,
out,
yeah,
you know,
no, absolutely. So he comes up with this vision. He's about to get going on it. He finds backers, then the troubles hit, and now nobody wants to go to this part of Ireland. Why doesn't the estate go down? What keeps it above water?
two things: selling land, furniture, paintings, and also he started a business around equestrian riding holidays because, some of the bravest people are people that ride, and especially, from Northern Ireland, because they're so used to being ballsy. And we had a lot of Swiss riders as well through a Swiss agent. So I grew up with the equestrian centre, and lots of people coming here to ride horses. And because of the beautiful land here, and there's a sort of amazing amount of timber and huge amounts across country, and the days before insurance got silly, lots of people used to come here for, riding and hacking and cross country.
I grew up in the UK riding, and so yeah, I remember seeing the adverts for Castle Leslie in the equestrian magazines as a boy, and thinking, oh God, looks amazing. I'd love to go there. These sweeping, views and people jumping cross country jumps, and it just all looking so amazing and so perfect. And thinking, oh, I'd really like to go there one day. And I sort of, it had always been kind of in the back of my mind, yeah, Castle Leslie. And so it's amazing to me to end up there with you last year. I go, actually, there's that little boy in me, that was looking at that ad, back in the 1980s going, yes, I made it there. As you say, that was before the days of insurance and liability and people suing each other and that sort of thing. Taking people for cross-country riding holidays isn't exactly the safest business bet in the world, because people are going to fall off and they are going to get hurt. It's just, there's gravity. It's just the nature of the beast. Your dad started this equestrian center specializing in this. What happened to it? Because it seemed on the outside very successful. to me as a boy, seeing the ads, and wanting to go.
Absolutely. Where are we? 84. I was in England training. I got my AI and then got my II in talent. And I phoned home to say I got my II at 18, which was quite young. And he said, "Oh, but I'm really sorry, I've had to sell the equestrian centre." So I thought, well, I will buy that back. And it took me 20 years to buy it back. And they were really gracious about it. And then we built the new hotel wrapped around it and the new yard that you've seen. We got some support from our tourist board for the indoor arena and the yard, which meant we could build a sort of a 4 or 5 star facility that normally in those days only people, in top competition yards managed to get into. We just wanted to make a really good yard accessible for everybody.
Now,
Whether it's
you threw out some acronyms there, which not everyone listening will know. So I just want to, just for the listeners who don't know quite what that language meant. Okay, so the equestrian professional world in the UK, most people get what's called a BHS, British Horse Society, AI, assistant instructor, as a sort of basic. And then there's an II, intermediate instructor, and then there's an I, instructor.
Mm.
And there aren't many BHSIs out there. To be a BHSI is like a big deal. And you got yours at what?
No, well, I got my AI at 17 and my II at 18, and I wanted my I by 21, and I wanted to be a fella before I was 30. But the plans changed. Instead of going to Germany to train at 18, I came home and started a yard because I just knew that if I didn't come home and stake my claim, probably more would have got sold. And I didn't want to be in a situation where I found out about it through a phone call after it had happened. So,
all right. So you get your II, which is a major deal at 18. Yes. I remember there was maybe a few IIs in the part of England that I grew up in, and they were all fearsome, ironclad English horsey women bellowing to each other as Macedon bellows to Macedon, exactly, across the primeval swamp. And they were all, it had taken them into their 30s or 40s to get there. Obviously, it was a major achievement. Get that.
well,
Go ahead.
Talent is an incredible school. I mean, talent, the Equestrian Centre talent is phenomenal. So
Talent.
So Pamians and Molly Sivwright's Equestrian Centre. So I was there for 4 months, and it's an amazing boot camp, and they produced incredible riders one after the other. I'm not one of them. So, but horses were never going to be able to make the sort of money that I needed to put the place back together. So it was always horses, hospitality, and heritage.
What made you feel? I mean, the hospitality industry is notoriously demanding. It grinds people down. I've had lots of friends who were chefs, hoteliers, that sort of thing, and it took a toll. And the world of horses, the equestrian world, similarly, you get bashed up. It looks glamorous from the outside, but we know that it's a lot of shit shoveling and falling off and getting trodden on and so forth. And there's massive financial overheads. So to come in at 18, 19 and say, okay, I'm going to get this equestrian centre that's just been sold.
I started with another year.
How did you, let alone going into hotel, making a hotel, how did you begin?
Oh, the wonderful thing about young is being, was the young and foolhardy. So at 18, there was another stable yard in the back of the estate, which has been the sort of working horses yard. The one where the equestrian centre was the agent's yard for his horses. Then there was a second yard for the carriage horses. And then the third yard was the hunters and the working horses. So I took the old third yard on the back of the estate and started there. And I got a grant from the County Enterprise Board. I didn't actually. I got an ANCO grant for about 1,200 quid and started the yard and worked up from there. So,
how did you find your clientele? How did you find your stuff? How did you run a team as just a kid like that?
I've been out of school 4 years at that stage. So in my head, I wasn't a kid. I left school at 15. So teaching was something I'd always loved and did quite well. and also flat work and schooling and re-breaking horses that everybody had mucked up. And I ended up having some nice horses through. And then I sold a horse out to Canada. And at 21, I just knew I needed to get away and travel. I always wanted to come home. So I went out to Canada after PK, the little bay mare that went out, and worked in Canada for a while, and then Virginia, and then San Francisco, and out to Australia, and traveled and worked for about 3 years.
Why wasn't the financially troubled estate sold out from under you while you were doing that? How did you? Or did you take a risk that it might just not have been there to come back to?
No, I knew that I needed to get away and travel. I mean, he must have sold something quite well to be able to survive for a couple more years. And then he actually sold something that sold okay. And then I got to go to hotel school in Switzerland. My sister got to film school and my other sister got to university. And then back into financial trouble. And he got a big offer from a Japanese corporation to become, I think, their cultural liaison center for Europe. And I shortened my course in Switzerland. So I doubled my hours. I was doing 60 hours a week for the study. And then I remember I was down in the fridges downstairs and I can't remember what I was getting. And a phone call came in and he said, "Are you coming home?" And I said, "Just give me 6 months." This was November, December, or maybe January. I said, "Just give me 6 months to the summer and I'll be home." And I came home when I was 24.
Okay.
Ancient I were.
And you got, really in the old days in Ireland, you'd have been an old mate. What? So did you get to work alongside your dad, pulling it up again and getting it back on its feet?
Not really. I mean, Dad was 48 when I was born. So what age was he at that point? I was 24. So he was sort of early 70s. And am I right? Late 60s?
You're talking to the wrong person for maths here.
48, 60. Yeah, he was early 70s. And it was because I remember doing his 70th birthday. And he also, when he'd smoked, which if you've got, weaker lungs is not the cleverest. He nearly died when we were children from double pneumonia. And the doctor said, "You continue to smoke and you've got 6 months." He'd also, always had asthma. And then he got emphysema and he lost about a third of his lung capacity. So big, damp, cold house. I mean, the problem with damp air is there's less oxygen in it and it's much harder to breathe. And he really couldn't cope with winters here. So he was around my first winter and in a ski suit. He literally got into a red ski suit and lived in it for the winter. Your body self-cleans after a while. And then he'd come home for a bit in the summers. So he died in 2001. So I was 34. I'd just been home 10 years at that stage. So, yeah.
So
Early.
you found yourself at 24 saying, "Okay, I'm going to take this huge lumbering place, which is very beautiful, and I'm going to make a world-class hotel and equestrian center out of it." How do you even begin?
It was a lovely old saying that the best way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. So you just do little bits. So I started with horses the first winter, and then I did tea rooms. I got a grant for 5,000 for the county enterprise board, and then I sold my dad's card for the other 5,000. Then bit by bit, he left to 5 of us, so I got an agreement with the rest of the family. And then I started 6 bedrooms, and then I bought out all the freehold from everybody. And then just bit by bit, you just keep picking away. That's all you can.
How did you find the guests? How did you find the staff? How did you find the team? How did you run that? You make it sound so easy. It couldn't have been.
There's always, listen, having children, I wasn't brave enough to do that in all the wonderful forms that they come in. And there's wonderful proof of local people who came to work from, some of our team were 14 when they started, still in contact with them, and their mothers now, which is wonderful to see. And yeah, remember we were in an area where there weren't an awful lot of jobs at that time and just built it up. But, I don't make it all look wonderful now. I have incredible CEOs who's been here 15 years at this point. It's his birthday tomorrow. And there's a team of probably 200 on the estate. So they're the ones that really make it look fabulous and seamless and wonderful. not me.
How many people were working on the estate when you began to put it on?
Vegetarian housekeeper still lived here. He has been retired twice, but kept coming back because the house was very much her life, and I very much understand that. Who else was here? Jack Heaney, one of the old foresters, was a wonderful character. Eugene Dinkin, the old head gardener's son, was ranting about. Mrs. Dinkin, his mum, was on the back in the back gate lodge. Harry was retired farm manager. He was in one of the gate lodges. The wonderful Gormley clan where Jackie started in the yard. She's been here since I was 12, very much part and parcel. And she's in the stewards in the dairy house. And that's theirs. So yeah, there were people scattered around the gate lodges and me.
Okay. And you built it up to 200. Incredible. I know that you battled some.
No, it's not.
Say that again.
It's a huge team effort. It's not just me.
Yeah, but I know what you're saying, and you're very modest. At the same time, it's been grown and coaxed and nurtured. So you pull this estate, this sort of old, basically bankrupt estate, up by its bootstraps. You managed to, at beginning at age 24, begin with a hotel and equestrian centre, which is not an easy thing. You mentioned that you left school at 15. I know that you've talked to me about your struggles with dyslexia. Talk to us about that, and how did that inform your self-perception and your feeling of yourself as an entrepreneur? And
you know, what's really funny is, really interesting is, you know, I love the fact we can talk about neurodiversity and that the human mind processes information in so many different ways, and we're starting to understand some of them. I'm part of an entrepreneur cohort, and they were looking at, there's a lot of research being done into sort of the percentile with the people that think differently, you know, whatever the norm is supposed to be in the first place. But the entrepreneur brain and that sort of thinking differently is huge correlation. You know, people talk about thinking outside the box. I've never found the box. I don't know what the box looks like. It's just, so when you go through school and you come from a house like this, it's not easy because they go, okay, the fact you think you are, you know, you're from the big house, you think you're special. You know, Dean Swift, the great writer in the 1700s, complains that our house has loads and loads of shelves upon which sit many books written by the Leslies all about themselves. You know, and they went on to write another 200 books after that. So to come from a very literary family and not be able to read and write the same way everybody else does wasn't easy. And there was, you know, you tried to say you're dyslexic and then people just said, oh, you thought you were special. And so, no, it certainly wasn't the easiest time. But then you went home into this wonderful free thinking world where anything was possible. And then you just got with ponies. And the great thing about horses is they don't read and write and they don't speak English. And, you know, they see pictorially and they see shapes and textures and ratios. And, you know, they think they don't need to do the academic bollocks. I mean, just watch any, you know, horse going, you know, cross country at a high level, or dressage at a high level, or show jumping, or, you know, a barrel racing, any of the sports. And you go, God, you know, their brain function is incredible there because their brain controls their body. I mean, they're amazing. They process so much information at such high speed, and they don't read and write. They don't speak English, and
right, but so they're also not expected to run businesses, though, are they? I mean, they do. They probably do a better job.
No, so I think it was that perception, that ridiculous perception of what we understand intelligence to be. You know, this whole thing about intelligence, and you have to be intelligent, and intelligence was linked to academia. We're now understanding there are so many different forms of intelligence. And I think the absolute hard-ridged thickness of intelligence equaled academia in school was very damaging for a lot of kids.
I could see how coming back from a school where you basically been told you're stupid, you know, and I remember when I was a boy at school, dyslexia was considered to be by a lot of teachers stupidity, and now we know it's actually sort of part of genius syndrome. But of course, it wasn't looked at that way, and I could see how coming back to this, you know, fairy world with ponies and hippies and amazing, could give you a safe haven. But then, of course, you had to go out and, cope with, even within the horse world, sitting exams, doing that sort of thing. And then, of course, you go off to Switzerland and you go to catering school. How did you function there?
But I think with the equestrian in my day, it was all oral or practical, which was great, or teaching. And so you didn't have to do the written, which was brilliant. So even in a high level, I don't think in my day there was any written papers. And in hotel management, a lot of it at the beginning was practical, but I learned all the workarounds and I learned how to, they didn't mark you on your reading and your writing skills, but I learned how to learn as such in the way that was needed. And I got a 5.8 average out of 6 by year 3, which was not bad. The languages tripped me up. The languages brought my scores down. What people forget is this is my theory and I'm sticking to it. His dyslexics' brains are very logical and that they're always taking vast amounts of data that most other people don't even see when they look at something, whether it's shape, color, texture, size. And they're always trying to process it into a form of logic. And there's so many different logics that you can take out of a series of data. As we know from data mining now, that's my theory, that's what we're always trying to do. And then that makes the place a sort of a safe and a calm place because you can put things in an order that they're supposed to be and, that the world says they should be. And language is no logic to it. It's other than German.
Right, exactly. Which is what I'm struggling with right now. But exactly. So you go off to Switzerland, dyslexic, and then you're expected to do stuff in other languages and you're juxtaposing letters and so on because you're taking in all this information. And yet you achieve this high grade point average. How?
I just studied. We had 40 hours of lectures and practical a week. And then I doubled my course and did 60. And then I started at 8 in, and then 2-hour lunch break. But I did library for lunch and, took a sandwich in and studied. You just work. And then I'd work till sort of 6 o'clock on a Saturday night or 8 o'clock on a Saturday night, go out for dinner, go clubbing, sleeper ski the next day and start again. So, you were doing 80, 100 hours a week between classes and study, but that's what it took. That's what you do in horses and that's what you do in hospitality in the early days.
Sure. At what point did you find though that the dyslexia was no longer tripping you up in any way, was not impeding you? Was there a point where you were like, actually, it's just not even an issue. I've been told this is, or was it a slow thing that was more imperceptible?
No, definitely. It's always there. You learn workarounds. I've got my own email language and my own written language. Everybody on my team knows that because I read by shape recognition and placement of word. And if you don't give me the context at the beginning of a document, you can get me. So once there's context, then say it says cat at the top of a document, all those shapes are going to be related to cat. So then your brain recognizes all of the words that relate to cat or what a cat might get up to. And therefore it figures out the shapes of the words and then it puts them in. So they, you can see words that are similar shapes. There could be lots of things, but I know they're related to cat. So it could be only one of 20 words. And I know the context. So I'll work out what's actually on the paper. So no, we don't read by letters on a page. How ridiculous would that be? Seriously.
Unimaginative, indeed. What about numbers? Did your dyslexia go to numbers as well? And
no, because I learned early on that numbers are ratios. There's 10, 1 to 10, 1 to 12. After that, everything is a ratio within that. So you learn all the ways of quick multiplication and division and all the rest, which of course you lose once you start using calculators. But numbers are highly logical.
Okay.
2 plus 2 will always be 4.
Depends on your accountant, but yeah.
Depends on your accountant. And 2 and 2 could be 22. But 2 letters beside each other could be a whole load of things.
Right. Do you find, or did you find then the same difficulty in reading and understanding nuance, emotion, sarcasm, that sort of thing with people? Or was that never a problem?
Oh, absolutely. It depends on the writer. I've just finished reading Ben Goldsmith's God is an Octopus, and it is one of the most magical, sublime books I think I've ever read because of his ability to portray incredibly complex situations like the death of his very fabulous and wonderful daughter at 15 in a farm accident, to his going through the desperate grief and really falling in love with and understanding nature and rewilding. And he ended up, in DEPRA, the Department of Food and Agriculture in the UK for 5 years. But because his English is so, I don't know, it's just so easy to read. So you really get the highs and the lows. There are other writers that try and write simple stories, but use complicated English. And you're sitting there going, why is that word there? What does that mean? And the words just, I don't understand their flow of English. So God, I think I'd just pull my toenails out if you asked me to read Shakespeare or Old English. Yeah, I love his works in a play because you can figure out what they're trying to say because of the body language and the setting and the costume. And there's lots of other ways to read the emotion within a play that you just can't read in a book.
And that's interesting because I know you to be a reader, and yet there you are with dyslexia. Was there a point where reading kicked in as a pleasure?
Studying veterinary notes for veterinary notes for horse owners, right? Reading all of the manuals for anatomy and veterinary and stuff for teaching. They're all very logical. I think, somebody like, for me, Patricia Cromwell, the crime writer, again, writes in a language that makes sense to me. So, but there are other writers I just cannot get beyond sort of page 3 because I can't make sense of the order of that they use words. And big words, marmalade.
Marmalade, yeah, that's a
big word.
It's a word that makes me. It's a word for a cat, isn't it? I mean, that's it.
Yeah, Marmaduke and Marmalade. They're both types of cats.
Is Marmaduke a dog? Yeah, Marmaduke's a Great Dane, I think, isn't it? But maybe a Great Dane that eats cats and therefore they taste like marmalade.
Yes, exactly.
When you were a kid, growing up feral in the woods there, were you reading then, or did it kick in later?
No,
okay.
Later. I think it was always. Oh God, I was always reading books on horse training for the first number of years of my life, and then when I was traveling, you probably started to read more for pleasure, especially a long train journey or somewhere, or sitting in a train station or backpack. Backpacking can be a very slow moving process. So definitely started to read more there and wanting to read books about the country and the culture that I was going to see. I made the reading Shogun before I backpacked around Asia.
So it kicked in for you sort of more in your 20s. That's the dyslexia side. Now, I know that you also battled cancer, and that's a difficult thing in any context. But when you've got the weight of a large business on you and the livelihoods of lots of people and the wealth and the land, because it's not just a business as in people and money, you're looking after landscape, you're looking after woodlands, you're looking after livestock. Talk us through that.
Well, I've been in and out of hospital since my late 20s with some form of extreme exhaustion. And then in my early 40s, I did an amazing thing called the Hoffman process, which is probably, for me, definitely, it's a sort of week-long course, and you just literally get stuck into understanding how your behavior works and the things that you've learned and what serves you and what trips you up and sort of how your brain makes sense of things that are confusing. And I think that helped me let go of a lot of the sort of confusion of, when I was younger. So funny enough, when I got a diagnosis with breast cancer, I think it was also a bit like, because I've done so much veterinary, it's just like, well, this is just something we need to deal with. And it hadn't started to spread, although I found the lump in June, went to the doctor, 10 days to get an appointment. I had a problem with an ingrown toenail. It was really annoying and very painful, and something else. And I actually forgot to say about the lump. And then in November, I was seeing somebody in New York at the time, And he said, look, couldn't do the long distance bit and other bits. And he said, oh, I meant to say, by the way, as he was walking out the door, there was a bit of a lump. I think maybe you should get it checked. And I went, oh, that's the lump I meant to get checked in June. And it was quite a bit bigger. So I went home and I just didn't tell anybody. I told one person because I can't do all the faffing about. And I went through surgery and came out on 24th of December and ran a Christmas drinks party here for 100 and something people, which starts our annual Christmas drinks party for everybody locally. And then a few days later, a friend hugged me and burst my stitches at a party. I was still not trying to tell anybody, but ended up back in hospital. No, it was fine. I mean, it's a very guided process, surgery, chemo, and radio, and the different drugs. And you come out the other end. And I hate to say, I loved being bald. I mean, I struggle with long hair, and I've always got my hair tied up, and I had always very hairy legs and stuff. So somebody said,
me too. Yeah.
Yeah, but yours is supposed to be. Somebody said if you wax your legs the couple of days before each chemo session, you'll end up with no leg hair because they're too weak to grow back. So that was an upside. But then a year later, I was diagnosed with MS, multiple sclerosis, and that was a bit more annoying because that's a bit more shadow box, and you never quite know what tricks it's going to pull on you. So and it's for life. I mean, there's no sort of, I'm 12 years after breast cancer now, so I don't even think of it. MS is a little bit more annoying.
Yeah, so MS is in my family, and I know the exhaustion factor as well as the other things. And I also know the exhaustion factor of being an entrepreneur and working in hospitality, let alone at the scale that you're doing it there. How do you possibly cope with that?
I slept for 3.5 months last year. That worked really well. And then I moved my office home to my garden shed. Do you like my sky?
I do like your sky. Yes. I wish the listeners could see it. There's a sky paint. Sammy's sitting in her garden shed, which is her office, and she has the sky painted on the ceiling and the forest painted on the wall. It's wonderful.
Well, the wall's wallpaper, and then the sky, for blue sky thinking. So you do that. Yeah, I moved home, my office home, which is great. And my garden table became the boardroom our outside boardroom during COVID. But I do have to be a little bit careful because I could go kitchen, office, garden, kitchen, bed, kitchen, office for a week and then realize I actually haven't left the premises for a week. So, yeah,
but it's a flippant thing to say, though, to say, well, I slept for 3.5 months. You and I both know you can't do that because of the demands and pressures of the job and running everything that has to be run.
I did, and there was no.
How did you manage to achieve that, though? Given there must be listeners who are battling with this right now.
No, I have an amazing team, and they've really got my back, and I have an amazing person who helps me in my house, and
they must have needed decisions from you. They must have needed really.
No,
it could run at that point.
Very rarely. I wasn't 3.5 months in a row. It was, a day here, a week there. Right. It was in and out. And they kind of also tend to know when I'm getting a bit wobbly. So, they'll sort of front load stuff. So, yeah, even yesterday I was on the computer and my eyesight shattered. So it's like a clear kaleidoscope and everything moves around the place. Mm-hmm. Right. I can't. And I was proofreading a spreadsheet of figures. I was like, this just isn't working because they're all moving all over the place. So just go to bed, and I got it done today. So, yeah.
What would you say? I mean, there will be listeners who are facing cancer, MS, and other fairly serious challenges who are trying to keep businesses, jobs, families, and so on together. As someone who's made a go of that, what are your tips?
I think there's if you've been a half decent person in life, I think there's always a lot more people around you that want to help than you think. And sometimes you need to ask, and sometimes you need to let people help. Sometimes you need to show your vulnerability and just go, my team know that if they hear my voice go to a certain level and I'm slow and I'm starting to not be able to complete a sentence and I'm trying to fight through it because you do fight through. I've got work to do and I need to keep going. somebody will quietly say, maybe, which, we'd like a cup of tea, or do you need to take a break, or, oh, God, I'm going to you're useless. At some point, and I now I just know you can't fight extreme exhaustion. You just end up being a cranky cow. And I apologize to everybody out there who have ever been ultra cranky too when I'm too tired, because I'm a thundering bitch when I'm exhausted. But it's normally because, to actually be able to, last year I had a week where it took me 4 days to get from my bedroom to the kitchen for a cup of tea. I found a cup of half sleeps in the bathroom on day 3, and that was kind of the first thing I'd eaten in 3 days. So that's just, when it hits like that, there's no point in fighting it. You just have to roll up and go to bed.
I mean, that's an interesting thing that you say, ask for help and allow your vulnerability to show. Because, we all of us who grew up in our generation were brought up with a stoic value system. And in it, very much stiff upper lip, put your socks up. And, it doesn't come easy to do that. And definitely also when we were younger, we would have actually been penalized for that. At what, so I think there's a lot of people who'd be listening who, like us, would struggle with asking for help. At what point did you manage to sort of give up that rugged individualist thing and say, okay, I'm just going to fuck it. I'm just going to ask.
I think, well, with breast cancer, I certainly had to back off and let my team do more. And do you know what? They're all way more talented than me and much better at the job than I was. And, they've always shone and grown, and it's wonderful. It's wonderful to see. MS has been a bit more of a struggle, I think, because the extreme exhaustion is quite insidious. And there are times you push through it and you get, and it lifts, and you're like, oh, I can keep going. I can get to that meeting. I can get to that party. I can get to the shops. I can. And then there's other times there's just absolutely no point whatsoever. And then I got a thing called an Aura ring that tracks my sleep and activity and heart rate and all of the rest. So it starts to tell me when I'm starting to dip. And that's when I go, okay, I'm not recovering as I should. I've just slept 14 hours and I'm still exhausted. So I need to be a bit more careful. So certainly being able to, and then you can flick back through, the last 2 or 3 weeks or last month or 8 weeks, and you kind of go, yeah, okay, I need to be a bit more sensible here. So wearable technology, the joys of bioelectronics.
Yeah, biofeedback, is it? Is it biofeedback?
Where they use electrical pulses to measure the chemical reactions that are happening with it.
Right.
Remember, big words like marmalade. Yes, that's it. And it's been great in monitoring. And at times you think, I've got a really good night's sleep, and you're looking and it goes, no, you didn't. And then by lunchtime you're going, no, I didn't. Yeah, you're right.
Interesting. I think there's probably a lot of people listening now go, actually, that's me. I often wake up exhausted. Why do I wake up exhausted? What is going on?
They're great things that very unobtrusively measure what's happening when you're asleep, because we go through this whole cycle of different sleep types, and you can get a great night's sleep, but your alarm wakes you up in the middle of deep sleep and you feel like being hit in the head by a mallet is just you've woken up at the wrong point in your sleep cycle. And it tells you when your midpoint is, and your heart rate and your body rate and your body temperature and oxygen saturations, and in a very, very simple way. And then you can start to see the sort of patterns. And I inject with interferon every 2 weeks. And it is interesting to watch what it says. And you're going, yeah, I feel like I've been hit by a bus. And just because I have been hit by a bus, it's okay to just go, yeah, my body's struggling for the next 2 days.
Would you say that your main strategy for keeping up with work while having MS is managing sleep, managing exhaustion, managing tiredness?
Managing sleep. I do a lot of juicing, so I hate cleaning my juicer. So do it probably every 2 weeks and then freeze it, which is fantastic. And then have to remember to take it out of the freezer, but I do most days. So just trying to always make sure I get, lots of good micronutrients and looking after gut health. It's a little bit like soil health. We're starting to realize how complex it is and how important it is for our body health and our brain health.
Beyond taking probiotics, then, what do you do for your gut health? What tips have you got for the rest?
I've on a new one now that's around repairing gut because I've definitely got leaky gut. Then, it depends. It's really good liquid probiotics that survive getting into your gut. Lots of fiber because your gut needs it. And listening to your body and just seeing what foods work and don't work.
What foods do you find don't work for you? What would you say that there's foods that a lot of us?
Yeah, modern gluten. We forget that wheat has been systematically bred for a long time to have a higher and higher gluten level. The breads, when we baked it in the old days, had a 8 to 12 hour proof. So the yeast reacted with the gluten differently, and etched it and stretched it. So modern bread, commercial bread's a 1 hour proof. There's an awful lot of chemicals in it. The gluten is very high. You can often get organophosphate sprayed on the bread because if you do it in the small levels, the wheat thinks it's dying, so it shoves all of the nutrients up into the grain head, so you get a bigger grain head and a bigger yield. And that's legal in some countries, and you don't know where your breads actually come from. So, what was one of the most magical, purest things and the most delicious things that man developed over the years, which was breads, which was water and yeast and bread and flour and tiny bit of salt, or it mightn't even have yeast. I mean, look at all the magical breads around the world. And, we've turned it into this monster substance that so many additives and things in. And I think for a lot of people, if you've got delicate gut health, whether, we just don't digest it. I certainly don't digest it.
It seems to be a growing thing. I mean, I live here in Germany, and obviously bread is a massive, massive part of the culture. Breads, cakes, baked goods. And people proud, it's part of the national pride. And more people are showing up gluten intolerant. And it happened to my wife. And I remember for a while, we can't be. And it's, oh no, it really looks like it is. And then all of the pushback, it's very interesting from the older generation saying, oh, that's just all, hippie bullshit, blah, blah, blah. But you see so many people now who are not intolerant 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And as you say, it really does seem as though the process of bread making has effectively turned it into a toxic substance, unless you're getting, very artisanal,
Yeah, so I think it's a balance between gut health and unhealthy bread as such. I do some work in southern Italy, and, it's locally grown wheat. It goes down to the mill. It's milled that day. It's a 12-hour proof. It's slow cooked in big old ovens. It comes out, a loaf the size of a car wheel. In the supermarket, you get, you buy a quarter of a loaf or half a loaf, and it doesn't go off for days. And then you just toast it and it's magical. And, the bread kind of lasts a week. And I don't have, I can eat quite a lot of that without getting into trouble. Give me a slice of, white pan toast here and, it'll be on the floor. But it's just getting so hard because, I work with food, and I also work in a county that produces a huge amount of food, and I'm fascinated by ingredients. But even the most simple thing that we made. So in southern Italy, you buy the local wine for €1.50, €2 in the supermarket. And that's the best wine because when they're making it at that price, one, it's local, and two, they haven't put any additives in it because they can't afford to and sell it at the price.
Right.
Yeah, it's not traveling. So you can put 16 different substances in wine in small amounts and not put it on the label.
Okay.
Wine should be grape juice and yeast.
Yes.
And the sulfur is normally burnt off on the top of a big vat to take the air out to stop the fermentation process. And it's so hard. I mean, listen, you've got me on a rant, but I just wonder how many people are going through all sorts of things that they just don't realize that, that's coming from our food. And also quite often because our soil is so depleted, a lot of our food doesn't really have very much nutrient in it.
Well, you're in the hospitality business, and I've eaten at Castle Leslie, and the food's amazing. You need to look after your own health with this. I know that you take a lot of care with the food that you serve there, and you're serving it in industrial sized quantities. I mean, you've got a lot of guests. You can have hundreds of guests there. How do you manage to dance that dance of making sure that all those people don't end up eating the poisons too?
We do the best we can. I mean, there's a lot more we'd like to do, and there's certain things. I would love to find a really good, free range producer of pork at scale, but we can't find one. But it is changing, and more we do. I mean, things like the venison all just comes off the estate. I mean, that's as wild and as healthy as you can get, and it's us mimicking nature and doing what nature would have done and taking out, the old and the weak that nature would have taken out. So, that's really healthy meat. I mean, if I had a magic wand, but then, I'm an oddity in terms of food. Most people eat what tastes fabulous. Our taste buds are designed for salt because we need it. We can only taste 5 things. Sour, and that's our taste buds going, oh, don't eat it yet. Plants being very clever and gone, no, don't eat us yet because our seeds aren't ready. There's a brilliant book called The Botany of Desire that really explains how Mother Nature has tricked us into doing what she needed us to do to continue to move seeds around the place when they were ready and drop them in other places to continue the species, the advancement of the plant species. We think we're in control, we're really not. So nature has sour to go, don't eat us yet because the seeds aren't ready. And it's got sweet to go, oh, do eat us now because we are ready. So we eat it, we eat the seed, it passes through our gut, we drop it somewhere else, nicely wrapped in a little bit of poo as a natural fertilizer. And all animals do this. And that gets, nature gets us to spread the seeds around us. And bitter is, please don't eat me, I'm poisonous. I really don't want you to eat this seed. And that bitter poison, our brains go, no, I'm not going to do that. And that's the 4 things our brain tongues taste. And umami, which is that mushroom meat one. But apart from that, everything else is smell. All our other flavors are smell. And our brains confuse the two. We're so convinced that so much what we taste is what we taste. It's not, it's what we smell. That's why when you have a cold, you lose your appetite because nothing tastes. Food still tastes. When you have chemo, the 2 things you don't lose are lemon for some reason and ginger. They're the 2 flavors that you can still, they're the last flavors to go.
Interesting. So, wonder why that would be. Interesting. It's because they're basically medicinal, do you think? Or that's your point?
I maybe came as such an unusual, such an unnatural thing that they're just by chance the last things that go. But it is, it's one of the chemo tricks, definitely with breast cancer. And remember, all chemo tricks are different, but they're the two flavors that you can get. But the food industry has figured out what's known as the unholy trinity was salt, fat, sugar ratio, because you would never get salt and fat and sweet. Sorry, salt, sugar, and sweet. Salt, sugar, fat together in nature. You wouldn't get salt and sweet together. Salt, toffee, caramel, and you get that nom 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 nom. And there are foods that will hit the bliss point. Tomato ketchup. You put tomato ketchup into a brain scan, it hits the bliss point. And so much of our food is designed to hit the bliss point, and you just want more of it. But it's not designed for nutrition, and it's not designed for soil health, and it's not designed for gut health. And then we wonder where we've gone wrong.
So talk to me about food production and soil health. You're actually involved in the production of food there on the estate. What do you guys do on there for that?
Well, of course,
to keep the soils healthy.
Oh, well, we've a whole strategy done to start doing some major rewilding, regenerative farming and biodiversity friendly gardens. So in September, October this year, we hope to be able to really step it up, but do it in a way that it's monitored so that we can show what's actually happening. Because, the whole rewilding or, nature regenerative, sorry, there's something banging on my roof. That whole nature-led regeneration is not always that well measured and monitored to be able to show the real impacts of it. So yeah, that's
What
what we
what are you doing to measure what okay, what are you doing to measure and monitor it, and what sort of scale are you doing it on?
we hope to do a good few hundred acres. This new technology out where you can constantly monitor the carbon in the soil, both the available carbon and the inherent carbon. It's looking at air quality and water quality. It's looking at we've done all our baselines on all our different species. So to have a look at as it changes, what species come back, because about 30% of climate change, they reckon, is linked to loss of biodiversity. Well, some of the worst countries in Northern Europe are Ireland and the UK in terms of biodiversity loss. We've
Why
just
is
been out.
that? Why is that, do you
Uh,
think?
we didn't notice. I mean, I went to Scotland last year to look at a rewilding project, and I find the Highlands so beautiful. And I'd known about the clearances, the human clearances, which were unbelievably horrendous. I didn't realize that they just cut all the trees down and put sheep in. So all those wonderful wild heather moors, which were wonderful for deer stalking for, a handful of the wealthy elite, actually just denuded nature. I mean, the salmon population is about to collapse in Scotland, and that's their native fish. It's just getting, we've, as somebody once, well, two things. Somebody said it's a bit like flying a plane and throwing bits out the window that you've no idea what they were, wondering why suddenly, at some point the plane crashes. And the other one, somebody said the other day, even a parasite is clever enough to know not to bleed its host dry. And in Ireland, we wiped out our entire genetic stock of pigs. Every small holding in Ireland had a pig. They were just part and parcel. Pigs are nature's plows. They rootle all the time. They're always turning soil over, which allows seed to get in and all that natural regeneration. And somewhere in the 70s and 80s, because we didn't think they were of any value, and we wanted to breed the Dutch, the big fat white Dutch pigs that are produce meat at high speed, we wiped out an entire species and nobody noticed. It, it's
Yeah.
frogs and
I mean, because when you go to Ireland, you look around and go, wow, it's beautiful. It's countryside. It's green. It's nature. There's hedges and woods and birds. And you don't go to Ireland and think biodiversity loss when you look around.
huge, horrendous. So in our county alone, the last 10 years, we've lost 1% of our hedgerows per year. That's 10% of our hedgerows gone in one decade. Our air quality is not great with our intensive farming. We have monoculture grass because we've got one species of grass. So, our bee population is, on getting critical. I mean, it's just thing after thing, but because we look so green and verdant, we think we're okay. We're not. We're went down to less than 1% native woodland in this country in the 50s because we just cut down all of our native woodland. Anything that we had just got chopped up and burned. We wanted to put a tax on standing timber, native standing timber. My dad was part of the campaign to go, this is ridiculous. We need our trees. And then we plant 7% of our island with Norway and Sitka, which is a non-native commercial forestry. And just because it looks beautiful, it doesn't mean it's biodiverse rich. And we reckon, the world, there's so many statistics globally that we probably only have between 50 and 60 years of crops left. Because when we started to manage to harvest nitrogen into a stable form to be able to sell as nitrogen-based fertilizer, it's too toxic for our soil and it's killing all the mycelium and it's killing all the living microbiology in the soil. So slowly all our soil is dying. And
That's an interesting connection, which I haven't heard put so directly before. I just want to back up there for some of the listeners. So we hear a lot about depleted soil health and we hear a lot about loss of fertility, but it tends to get said rather than explained. That's very interesting. I hadn't heard anyone before now? Just you.
There's an amazing company called Super Soil, and they've got a great video that sort of that explains it. So I've cogged some of it from their video. But basically, over every acre of land, there's about 30 tons of nitrogen in the air, and all the microflora and microbiology, in the soil would draw that down and feed it to the plant roots.
And that kills the mycelium.
And then you've got then you have this, in nature, that's what it would do. And there's this amazing web underneath of mycelium, which is kind of, they call it the wood wide web, it was sort of nature's highly intelligent system that knew where to move water and where to move nutrients around the soil. But the microflora would pull the nitrogen basically out of the air. So a scientist, I think at Huber, realized how this works. And they went, oh my God, if we can capture nitrogen and put it in a stable form and put it into bags that we can sell to farmers, they can up the nitrogen value in their soil, which you do, but it's quite harsh. So it slowly kills the natural process within the soil, and you become reliant on constantly putting in nitrogen that then starts to deplete the soil further. So an Irish company has come up with an amazing product called Super Soil, which feeds microflora, microorganisms to then start to naturally draw down the nitrogen out of the soil.
Almost treating the soil like the gut, like almost like probiotics in the gut, microorganisms for the soil.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the number of microorganisms that we have on our body and in our gut, and it's it's in the thousands. Half of which we have no idea of what they are and what they actually do. And it's the same with our soil.
So these
make a lot of money out of selling nitrogen.
Right. Now, these regenerative farming practices that you're starting to do on the estate and for food production and so on, and taking that into the commercial side, because you're obviously feeding it to people in the restaurants. There's many restaurants on the estate and so on. How much education are you giving the guests and the punters who show up to the estate? How much are they aware of this?
Not much. In 2 or 3 years' time, we hope to have an amazing exhibition space. And there will always be a need for intensive farming as such, but whether it is lab-grown meats, whether it is black soldier fly larvae as a protein source, whether it's vertical farming, but one where we manage to get all the micronutrients into the plants, food is going to change absolutely massively.
Tell us about this exhibition space that you're putting into the estate. What's going on with that? What is that?
We want to do a really interesting space to tell our story of our relationship with people and planet, and also the understanding the human body in a really fun way that can work for school kids and it can work for neuroscientists. And that's all I can tell you at this point. Otherwise, I would have to kill you. And Ileana would not be happy.
Give us a little bit, a tiny tidbit more. What is it? What is the mission of the estate with this in the coming years? What is it you want to achieve?
I think the irony is that this estate was always very innovative, and you had amazing women, and you had a whole series of very innovative men, and then of course you got the odd generation that would just enjoyed life. But in general, they were innovative and thunk differently. And I don't know about you with a dyslexic brain, it doesn't really stop. You're always going, what if and only, and if I did this and if I did that, turn that upside down and we put that over there. And, it's just so back to how can you do the best with what you have and by those around you.
Right. What is it that you want to? Would this be a sort of ecological, educational space similar to, say, Eden in the UK or something like that? Or
we've been, and I think Tim Schmidt's amazing, and we've been talking. It's how do you tell the story in a fun way for people that just kind of want to float along the top, and how can you tell it in an educational way from children through to academics? How can you share research? How can you do food schools and the learning right the way through, the different levels that get, from, I said, fun and easy to, to serious food and gut health. how can you do that in a series of spaces? And technology allows us to do that now quite easily.
So in the next few years, we can come to Castle Leslie not just to experience beautiful nature, ride horses, eat amazing food, and look at incredible art and history on the walls of a stately home, but also to learn about soil health, ecology, and the land.
Absolutely. And our relationship, because I don't know about you, but last year with the hot summers, really started to get scary. And I think
Yes.
we're really starting to see it. And, one of the stats is that if things continue as they are, by 2050, 80 million people will be on the move every year through climate change.
Yeah.
And when you start to get into the conversation around climate justice, and, we're on 12 tons of carbon roughly per head in Ireland. And my unofficial goddaughter is Somali. Her mother's Ahmed is an amazing human rights campaigner around FGM. And, Somalia is going into its sixth year of desperate drought. There's parts of that country that you just wonder, will they ever be livable again? It's parts of the world that are flooding. More and more of the world is becoming inhospitable, and people have to move.
What's
And-
FGM? You said FGM.
Oh, you're a boy. Female genital mutilation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Google it. It is
Yeah.
probably the biggest killer of children worldwide that is totally preventable.
Mm.
Disease and war and famine are horrendous.
The human imagination of all the things that one could come up with to pointlessly do. That is one of the ones that mystifies me. That you have someone sitting around going, what should we do this year? Oh, yeah, well, maybe we should invent this thing called female genital mutilation. How does one even come up with that?
Subjugation of women, but that's a whole other
Indeed
subject. And it's part. You can say it's part of a culture, and of course it is. But it's also, how did it become part of that culture? And it was something that was sort of started by the Egyptians and spread into surrounding countries.
Yeah.
But
yeah, well, I mean, we all grew up with institutionalized suffering that was sold to us.
Exactly,
we went to as we were beaten and that sort of thing, saying, "Well, this is the culture." And I think we all said, "Well, actually, that's not a culture I particularly want to participate in. You're just making me participate in it."
And and as people in the Western world, we can't sit there and wag the finger and go, that's wrong. All we do in the IFRS Foundation is help people on the ground who want to make a difference and support them in what they understand the ways they want to change their own culture. This Western thing of going in and going, we're white, we know better than anybody else is a load of.
Well, sure, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. I mean, yes, I from my years in human rights, it's for sure. And at the same time, I feel, and I think everyone knows, that there are things that go beyond culture that are just purely human. But it's very easy to hide behind culture and say, "Oh, this thing is a valuable cultural practice," even though it kills people, and therefore So, and it's a dance one has to do. This is something that you are involved in a large degree in your life, is it? This human rights work.
Well, I met an amazing girl called Ifra Ahmed when the life story of her film. Sorry, when the film of her life story was being made. It's an amazing film called Girl from Mogadishu.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "How can I help?" And I asked about did she have a charity or a foundation? And she said she did, but it was sort of very much a Facebook page. And she's an incredible campaigner who's done amazing things. So I just helped set up the sort of formal legal structure behind the foundation, got about 8-10 years ago, so that the structure was there to really allow her to do her work and get the support behind her that she needed and the fundraising that she needed. And also, the little bit of governance and measurement to be able, to go to the bigger funders and go, this works. So she came up with this amazing campaign called Dear Daughter, where parents mothers, fathers, aunts, uncles pledge not to cut their child. And that's been incredibly powerful, giving people the power to say, as an individual, say, no, I don't want my child cut. I don't want my niece or my nephew cut who, I'm looking after because their parents aren't here anymore. And it's very ground roots. And, it's very much her campaign. And it's really starting to take traction.
What's the name of her organization?
IFRA Foundation,
Can you
IFR.
IF?
RAH. And her name is
RAH. AFRAH. Yeah. Foundation.
IFRA and IFRA Ahmed.
Mm-hmm.
And it's called the IFRA Foundation. And she was trafficked, long story, horrendous story. And she was trafficked into Ireland around probably 15 or 16 years old. And she actually ended up having the law changed here and the legislation enacted before she even got her citizenship. She is one of the most phenomenal human beings I've ever met. And when she was on the campaign trail and back in Ireland, she used to live with me. And I never, ever heard her once go, poor me, the world is a terrible place. She's just like, be a voice, not a victim. It needs changing. So how do we change it? And lots of amazing people got on board, and in behind the foundation, with fabulous CEO, an incredible chair, somebody who's very senior in obstetrician who's just retired from work and come on board, and just slowly, bit by bit, giving people the voice to say, no, this is the change that we want.
Do you harness the clientele of Castle Leslie in that educational and funding process?
No, because people come here on respite, and there's that balance between using the platform you have and abusing it, for the want of a better word. So on either World Women's Day or World FGM Day, which is the 6th of February, we will celebrate IFRA.
Just writing this down. World FGM Day is the 6th of February.
Yeah. I mean, IFRA got FGM onto the Charter for Human Rights. Before she was 30.
Good Lord.
She was 28 when her biopic was made.
And she is someone who's also found resilience at Castle Leslie, as so many have. Interesting.
Not resilience, respite. So
right.
Usually, and the only reason she moved out 10 days before she had a baby, which turned out to be about 4 weeks before COVID lockdown, because she needed her own house and her own space. I have a 1.5 bedroom house, so it worked out well. And Sarah is amazing. Sarah's her daughter, she will be 4 at this point.
And the IFRA Foundation is operating out of Ireland, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How interesting. Yeah, it's interesting you say you've got 1.5 bedroom house. People assume when you drive up to Castle Leslie and you see the castle and you see the lodge and you see all the other buildings in which things happen, you think, well, that must be where Sammy Leslie lives. And then, of course, we find out where you actually live is in Narnia. That's one of the best things I've ever seen. For those, maybe I probably shouldn't disclose how you get to Narnia, because that's a bit of a secret within the castle. But suffice to say that you live in a very tiny sliver of the whole thing. The rest of it is given over to the enterprise.
Yeah, well, I live in an amazing little corner. I mean, it's small, but it's a fabulous little corner of the house. But my bedroom was an artist studio, so it's got windows on 4 sides, and is quite an amazing space to hold up in. But no, I've never lived in a normal anywhere in my life. I've either lived in lorries in Australia with the horses, or an old cattle shed in Dublin, or slept in stables in Sydney at the show. I've never, or lived at work. I've never lived in like a normal house with a front door and a back door, and not attached to anything else, or even a row of houses. I've never lived in a normal house. Wouldn't know what to do.
Well, yeah, probably go into the garden and move into the shed like you've done.
Yeah.
I know that you also have an interest in special needs.
Absolutely.
And I know that you are beginning to think towards this with the Castle Leslie estate as well. Talk us through what your ideas are there and what's happening with that.
We A while back, I started to hear about this guy that had come up with this amazing thing called the horseboy method. And it just absolutely fascinated me at the healing power of horses. And we've got lots of land and lots of space and lots of horses. And I think when you grow up learning slightly differently, and you realize that we know so little about how the brain grows and functions and works. And it was anything that it's back to, all you can do in life is best with what you have and by those around you. If we've got all these incredible things here. And then one day, by chance, I got locked behind a door with you and at an event for autism that somebody asked me to go to. So that's, I suppose, when the conversation really ramped up. And I started to know more and more people whose children had been diagnosed, going, if I can help in any way, it's the least I can do.
What's your vision when it comes to the estate with autism? What in your perfect world do you think would happen?
Absolutely what will happen, actually. We're lucky that they built 3 stable yards on the estate. So the yard behind the lodge would stay pretty much as it is. The second yard's become self-catering accommodation. And the third yard on the back of the estate, I think that's where we're going. We could create magical spaces. You introduced me to the incredible David Doyle. We went down to Liskennet and looked at all the amazing things that he's achieved. And he's been up to us as well, going, okay, we have the space, we have the want, we hope also the way to start to tell the stories about, how we learn, and also how equine-based therapies, movement therapies, nature-based therapies can really work. So it's a huge learning curve for me. I know I'm an absolute novice in this field, but I just know that we've got the bits to be able to put together, hopefully, to do something magical and to really help people.
It's funny you mentioned David Doyle. I so want to get David Doyle on this podcast. He flatly refuses. He will not speak. So
we time down on Friday, and why won't he speak?
He is the most strangely modest man, as you know. So I want to just let listeners who might not know who David Doyle is, let's just tell you who David Doyle is. David Doyle is the current incarnation of the wizard Merlin. I met David Doyle in 2012. I did a demo of Horseboy Method in Limerick, and I got an email 3 years later saying, "Oh, you won't remember me. I was at that thing." I took your website to the Irish Parliament and got €3 million, and we're just building a state-of-the-art horseboy centre. Do you want to come look at it? I'm like, I'm sorry, what did you say? And I went there and I looked at it and I said, "David, how did you do this?" And as you know, David, he's one of these, he speaks very softly. He's, I just talk to these people. And subsequently, he's started all these extraordinary autism centers. His daughter has very severe autism and also had a very good reaction through horses, as did my son Rowan. And he's created an entire paradigm shift I would say, in the mental health culture in Ireland. It's now creeping into Europe. So the fact that you're working with David Doyle makes me, as an autism dad, so incredibly happy. And I wish we could.
Thanks to you. I mean, I wouldn't have met him if it wasn't for you.
Anyone who's listening, check out David Doyle, St. Joseph's Foundation. It's in Charleville in County Cork. You ever meet that man, it will be a treat. But yes, this idea that an estate, it's very interesting to me, because you drive into Castle Leslie and you can feel, as you drive in, a shift in the atmosphere. And it seems to me that there is some sort of healing spirit to the land. It seems to me is no coincidence that the Leslie family, coming out of the explosive Reformation Renaissance history of Scotland and England. Then one bishop finds himself there by this beautiful lake, and in the 17th century, and no matter what craziness goes on in the rest of the country, and in fact, right there, the Cromwell and the English coming in and killing everybody, and then all the risings against the English, and then the first round of troubles, and then the second round of troubles, and the potato famine, and all of these things. So many estates burned, were attacked, were hated, with good reason by the lowest. Not Castle Leslie. Castle Leslie always stood. And as you say, the people there always seem to have been interested, unusually for their historical time, in doing the right thing. And there you are. You weren't even supposed to inherit the estate. And then
I didn't inherit the estate.
Okay.
I bought it.
Even more, there you were, and you had to buy the thing and get it back on its feet. And it seems to have always, and now you're getting it, from, okay, it's a luxury hotel, and yes, there's an equestrian center, it's all fabulous, it's all fantastic. And at the same time, the restoration of soil, the sustainable agriculture, rewilding, and now human rights, special needs. You can feel it when you drive in. What do you think is the sacred nature of that land? I'm very happy to get as woo-woo as you want. I'm all about
I don't know.
What is it? What is it? Are there sacred sites on there?
Iron Age fort behind us. Navan Fort, sees the High Kings of Ulster, is about 10 miles from us. But I don't know. The lake is 70 feet deep. I don't know. And I saw something the other day on Instagram where a guy put an electrode into the soil, and on a little meter, nothing showed. He held one piece in his hand. He had flip-flops on. Nothing happened. He took his flip-flops off, and you could see the electric current shoot up. I would love to measure the electromagnetics here. I don't know what it is. It is a very special place. Maybe it's the light off the water. It does have it has an energy all of its own, and it is a place all of its own. I do what I can, and the whole team do, but it is a living, breathing thing.
And it seems to be a place that has encouraged people, strangely, generation after generation after generation, through a violent history, to sort of step up to their higher self. So it's hard not to ask: are there ancient pilgrimage sites? Are there ancient druidic sites? Are there old stories?
There's crannogs on the top lake, but they would have been in habitation. Not that we know. I mean, there is one small ancient site on Kilty Bags, that small rath that got bulldozed out in the late 1800s. I've seen it on an old map, but I haven't found a very sacred site.
No old stories about saints, no fairy rings, no occult.
The small stuff. St. Patrick came to this village, and so the Vikings came here. The Iron Age settlements were here. The Vikings came here. St. Patrick came here. He built a small church here. Not that I found, but it doesn't mean there isn't, because Christian faith was very good at wiping out earlier things. I don't know, but it certainly is a magical place, and it gets most people.
Yeah, it's definitely a place where you come to go. I've stayed there with my son, and
the adorable Rowan.
And he's hilarious because you so kindly put him up in one of the rooms of the castle, and I went to check him. He said, "I feel like Henry VIII." And I said, I just need to lay on this bed with this canopy because it makes me feel royal. But that he came away saying, because he's autistic and he's sort of ultra sensitive and ultra authentic always. And he said, "Dad, there's something healing about that place. I want to go back there. There's something healing." He said, it makes me feel better in my head.
And it's wonderful. We can talk about stuff, because in the old days it would be, it's all woo-woo and fluffy and all of the rest. But I think more and more, we're starting to show our connection of nature, our loss of connection with nature, is hugely detrimental. It's that getting into water, it's walking in mud in the marshes, it's sitting on trees and under trees. It's just being immersed in nature, which of course is our natural place of being. I mean, it reckons something like 10,000 years for one genetic change to happen, in a species. And we've shifted so fast in the last few hundred years to being totally disconnected from nature. And I'm not sure that's healthy. So the more we can do to help people get re-immersed into nature in different ways, that's what we want to look at. And it's just how can we create a healing place? How can we create respite? How can we create respite for families with children, with autism and other, what word am I allowed to use? You can't say issues, difficulties.
Oh gosh, conditions, I think is probably that. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Sorry.
Well, it's so interesting, that the whole politically correct thing. I often ask Rowan, do you have a word that you want me to use? Like someone with autism, or I said, Dad, I'm autistic.
Yeah.
Just say it. Just use the word.
Exactly. So yes, it's, my dad did sort of things here during the Troubles to bring kids from inner city communities in Belfast from opposite sides together and a sort of camping summer holidays and just give them some proper outdoor fun and forget about, the Troubles. And he did for a summer or two, and then he got a phone call to tell him to stop. When you got those phone calls, you didn't not listen to them. So it is a very, very magical place. It absolutely is. And it's this sort of real little bubble, especially in this ever faster growing digital world where we are bombarded constantly with information and lots of stuff that's designed to, do that 4-minute dopamine hit that just becomes addictive. And it's rewiring our brains and most people don't notice. So it's the disconnect and the unplug and do strange things like talk to the person you came away for the weekend with. We've no televisions in the castle. Just refuse to have them. There's one swing that does, but they either look like mirrors or pictures. And actually because normally that sort of black hole of a television calls you when you come into the room to turn it on. No, it's being able to disconnect and reconnect with nature. And I think over the coming decade, we will learn more and more and more about the healing powers of connecting with nature. And I think we'll do it in a scientific way so that we can explain to, I was going to say the numpties, the powers that be, that we need that connect. I was in Singapore recently and they are very strong on their biophilic architecture, which is that whole thing of growing plants in and on buildings. And it, reduces air conditioning, it cools, it de-stresses it, mental health, it cleans the air. It has so many positives. And that's a small island with 1% of our land mass with the same population as Ireland. And you just smiled everywhere. You just kind of fell in love with the city because it is so green. It's just greenery everywhere. They've been greening it, from the 50s because they had quite visionary, powers that be at the time. Yeah,
I just want to talk about that for a moment, actually. The greening of buildings. I'm a great proponent of it. And it's interesting how when people talk about carbon sinks and that sort of thing, people talk about forests and all the things which we should have, but no one talks about ivy growing up buildings. Or I know there's a company in Spain, for example, that's doing moss-clad walls. I read somewhere that a concrete bench covered in moss actually absorbs more carbon than your average tree. These things I didn't know. But yet you see so few people doing it. And like here in Germany, I know that the moment I start to try and grow a creeper up my wall, all my neighbors go, oh, it's going to do this, it's going to do that. And then I'm thinking, yeah, but I grew up, in houses that had ivy on the walls and the house didn't seem to go anywhere and the wall didn't fall off. Where's this come from? This
It depends on the wall. Ivy is an incredible plant in so many ways, but if you've got soft mortar like lime mortar, it will actually get in between the stones and start to pull it apart. I mean, there's lots of creepers. I mean, we've one called Virginia creeper in a building that's probably 150 years old, and it won't get into the mortar. So some will attack buildings and others won't. But moss is an incredible substance. Moss lives on two things, especially sphagnum moss. It lives on water and carbon, and it literally sucks carbon out of the air and uses it as its food source. And that's why, having a lawn that's moss rather than monoculture grass is so much healthier in so many ways. And coating lots of things in moss absolutely cleans the air.
Yeah, I kind of want to do it on the side of my house here. I'm campaigning for it, and I hope to be successful in my campaign with my neighbors. But it's interesting to me that there's this idea of the clean wall, the clean building, the clean,
Well, look at biophilics. I mean, it's a whole science. I mean, there are certain plants that will break up walls. A sycamore tree planted near a building will break up, break up concrete, whereas other plants all their roots will just sort of wrap around things. But biophilics, it's a whole science. And
do you have a particular book that you would recommend us on that? Biophilics, is there anything?
On biophilic architecture? Not off the top of my head.
Okay, well, I shall go and look it up.
And it changes from place to place because there are things that grow well in different climates, and there's lots of different climates as well, and lots of different lots of different building materials. So you'd want to do it specific to the building materials used in your area and the plants that grow happily in your area.
What are you doing at Castle Leslie with that, out of interest?
With the new building, the new exhibition space, we want it to be as biophilic as possible. So, yeah.
So what will you do? What can you disclose? What are you gonna?
I don't know yet. It's at concept level, so we haven't got into the design detail at this point. That starts, I think, in September this year, because we're working in conjunction with our tourist board and our county council, and we want to do something that just hasn't been done here before. But that's normal on the estate. The estate built, one of the first pumped water systems for an estate in a village that was steam driven. So you turned on pumps and the water just popped out. And, we did an integrated wetlands for sewage where it's not just reeds, but it's 22 species of plant that eat all of the, the phages in the slime, eat all the bacteria in the water, and the water's got half the nitrates and half the phosphates of the water already in the river. So, nature has an awful lot of innovative solutions. And nature has an answer to, nature has a solution to every one of nature's problems. Because if it didn't, it would have silted up long ago.
Yeah, I've seen that sewage treatment plant on your estate, and it does. Does it do the whole village, or is it just the?
It does up to the equivalent to 2,000 people.
Yeah,
and it
amazing.
looks like a whole water garden, and the biodiversity in it is unbelievably high.
Yeah, it's like water meadows.
Incredible. Yeah.
How long has that been in? Did you plant that? Did you put that in deliberately?
Years. Yeah, no, that was worked with an amazing. We're very open-minded county council, and worked with an amazing designer called Rory Harrington, who designed it, and we worked with them and went, yeah, absolutely, let's test bed it. Let's be the first to build one of these in a historic setting in a village and an estate, and that's what we just want to do more of. And trialing and test bedding stuff as well. And we won't get everything right, but that's right. Then you share what works and what didn't work. And somebody else might go, oh, well, actually, if I turn that around and flip that upside down and put that over there, that might work. And then, somebody has to be brave and be quite happy to make all the mistakes. We've just ended up in this world where everything has to be perfect and research the nth degree before we do it. And I think one of the saddest things in our world is how insurance is just starting to rule the world. It's just stopping creativity. It's stopping people taking chances. It's stopping people experimenting because of the fear of not getting it right and getting sued if you don't get it right. The downside of not trying in the first place is starting to outweigh the downside of something going wrong.
How do you cope with that? Because you're dealing with a high risk thing at Castle Leslie. You still have an equestrian centre that specialises in cross-country riding. Cross-country
Absolutely.
riding is an innately dangerous activity.
Yeah.
How do you
Well,
deal with
look,
this insurance issue?
we make sure it's as safe as possible. The jumps are designed to be as safe as possible. They're all under, a certain height. All the landings and takeoffs are kept in really good condition. The horses are, oh, there's my wild cat. The horses are highly selected to be able to make sure that there is, as safe as possible. And still most people who come riding accept that there is some risk. But, 1.35 million people die in car accidents globally a year.
Yeah.
And we still drive. And what's amazing is we don't teach people to drive very well, and we don't do the continuous upskilling. And I think could do an awful lot more in road safety, but because it's still, profitable for the insurance industry, nobody's really got stuck in to make it as safe as it could be. And I did my regular license, and then I did a class 1 HGV license for 40-foot trucks. And sitting for a week in a cab with one other driver and an instructor between us, either driving or watching and listening. I mean, I learned so much compared to what I learned in my regular driving license, which I did 40 years ago. And nobody ever has checked whether I drive well or not. We should do our driving license and come back a year later and do another bit, and then next year do another bit. Over the first 5 years, have continuous improvement, and then come back in every 5 years for a top, because we learn bad habits.
Why did you learn to become a truck driver?
To drive a truck?
Yeah.
Wait, I'm sorry, horses, of course. If you're going to transport horses around the place, you need to be able to drive a truck, and you could do in the south a rigid license and then an Arctic license, C and a D license, or you could go up north and for the same amount of time and effort, you could learn to drive a 40-foot. And I hate to say, they are fabulous to drive.
You still drive a truck?
No, you need to keep all your driving up, and also cyclists terrify me now.
Yes.
I mean, in the old days, you didn't have to watch out for as many people in your blind spot, and cyclists that come up both sides of you, it's humanly impossible to be able to watch your left and your right mirror at the same time, as well as look at your windscreen. At some point you will miss somebody on one side or the other because they're everywhere. I don't know how they drive through towns. I really don't. Take my hat off to guys who drive 40-foots, anybody that drives a 40-foot.
It's amazing. One thing I didn't expect to come out of this interview was that Sammy Leslie is a truck driving mower.
I love it when I go to get my hire car and they kind of look at the section on your license to see, have you got a driving, and they're like, oh, no, it's good, but it's back to continuous improvement and upskilling, and we don't have it in driving.
So listen, I've learned a lot on this interview. I'm going to go off and look at biophilic architecture. I'm going to go and look at super soil. Is that?
Yeah. Super Soil's the Irish company. They're not that far from here. That is looking at feeding the soil and making the soil healthy so it can draw down the nutrients that it needs, rather than
getting away from the nitrogen, the harsh nitrogen that's killing the mycelium, right?
Yeah, and within the soil.
You mentioned a book.
It becomes dead rather than having, a living soil. It literally just becomes a dead substance.
You mentioned a book. You mentioned 2 books earlier on, which I want to just draw people's attention back to. You mentioned a book called The Botany of Desire. Is that correct?
Oh, The Botany of Desire by Michael Pollan.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
And he wrote another book that he's very famous for, which I can't remember. And The Botany of Desire is basically one of the principles behind rewilding, except it's what the botany, how we behaved, and it's how nature taught us to do the things it wanted us to do, to move seed around in different places so plants could continue to move. Because if seeds just fall beside the mother plant all the time, you just get this clump that's always fighting for the same nutrients. But if, if a peach tree could get you to eat the peach, seed and all, and then poo the seed out half a mile away, that peach tree had much more chance of surviving because it wasn't falling on the roots of its parent and fighting for the same nutrients. And that's why we taste in the way that we do, which is sour, don't eat me, I'm not ready. Sweet, please eat me now. Bitter, don't eat me, I'm poisonous and I don't want you to eat me. And salt is our body's need to look for, I was going to say isotopes. No.
Electrolytes?
Electrolytes. Thank you.
So this is basically how plants have domesticated humans.
Exactly. And it's back to our arrogance of humans thinking, I'm going to see what Michael put. Oh, the omnivore's dilemma, which is about eating plants or meat. But the botany of desires, very small little book, is just a real reminder of we are so deluded in thinking that we are in control of this planet and we are in control of Mother Nature. We will be the fifth race of humanoids to wipe ourselves off this planet, and nature will continue.
Hey, why break the tradition? You know,
Because it's painful and it's a lot of unnecessary suffering.
indeed.
And
Indeed.
that ability for nature to make us do what it needs, it's also what it does to the rest of nature. You know, it's not just us, the same rules behave, apply. But yeah, nature's very clever.
Then you also mentioned a book, God is an Octopus. Ben
God is an
Goldsmith. Please tell us a bit more about that.
Oh, it's such a beautiful book, and I've just finished reading it. He's an amazing environmentalist. He's an amazing human being, and they very sadly lost Irish, their 15-year-old daughter, in a freak farm accident. And it is his incredible love for family, for his daughter. It's a grieving process. I do not know how any human being deals with the loss of a child, and how he found healing in nature and went on to become an incredible campaigner for rewilding and nature-led restoration. And it's his journey, but it's just written in such a beautiful way. I've been asked to write a biography, and I'm going, oh my God, if only I could write like him.
It's on the list. I'm going to get God is an Octopus, Ben Goldsmith.
Yeah.
The Botany of Desire, Michael Poland. Okay.
Yeah. And then Wilding by Isabella Tree is a seminal book on letting nature-led regeneration. And they've just done a book called Wilding, which is the how-to manual of wilding large and small in regenerating nature to be able to give it its place and space that it needs.
Wilding by Isabella Tree.
Tree. Yeah.
Okay, great name. Okay.
So Rewilding was the first book, and then Wilding is the manual on how to do it.
Okay.
And it's just written in a very lovely language, very simple and easy to do and read and follow.
Is that something that people who just have a backyard regular
Absolutely
could benefit? Okay, fantastic.
Yeah. A garden or a big space.
Doesn't have to be Castle Leslie estate.
No, it can be your balcony.
Fantastic.
Any.
And then finally, Dear Daughter, the IFRA Foundation, IFRAH.
Yeah.
FGM, female genital mutilation. People should look up that.
Absolutely. And there's lots of ways to get involved or to support. The Dear Daughter campaign is people, a mother or a father or an aunt or an uncle or a guardian committing not to cut their child.
And then if people want to get in touch with you or get involved in some of the initiatives that Castle Leslie is involved in, I know obviously if they want to just come and stay in the hotel, they can look up Castle Leslie online and book. But if people wanted to get involved in the rewilding side, the soul regenerative side, the special needs side, the human rights side, what's their best way? Should they contact you? What should they do?
With the Leslie Foundation, which we've set up, so a newly fledged charity, amazing board of people coming on board, or you'll find me there as well. So yes.
The Leslie Foundation.
Yeah.
Is that a .org? Is that a .net?
.org, and then also through the main website through Castle Leslie.
And is that castleleslie.com?
.com.
castleleslie.com. And Leslie with an IE.
Sammy with a Y and Leslie with an IE.
castleleslie.com and the Leslie Foundation. Is it one word? The Leslie
With an
Foundation.
IE, sorry.
Is it the Leslie Foundation .org?
I have a funny feeling it's .ie rather than
Okay,
.org.
I'm going to look it up here on my phone. So we get the Leslie Foundation.
I should know.
God forbid one should know one's own website.
I know.
Foundation. Let's see. It is, you've got castleleslie.com, that we know. Let's see, the Leslie Foundation. Accept the cookies. Yes, I will accept the cookies. Here I see info at, you're right, it's info at lesliefoundation.ie. Info at Leslie with an IE, LESLIE foundation.ie. So confusingly two IEs within the same.
Terrible. How often do you do your own website?
You know, exactly.
I mean, you don't spend days Googling yourself. But I've gone all red. Must be the light.
I think I did that last in 2000 or something like that. And then I realized that I was profoundly uninterested in myself, but I was very interested in other people.
Yeah.
And that's sort of been how it's gone ever since. I find myself rather boring, but I find
I would agree with
like
that.
you absolutely fascinating.
I am really boring, honestly.
Well, I think you just put the lie to that. Sammy, it's been a treat. Thank you for letting us into the world at Castle Leslie. I would strongly urge anybody listening, put it on the bucket list, get your ass to Castle Leslie at some point, even if it's just to go have a bit of food and walk around that piece of magic. It's an extraordinary landscape, and it's one of the few that is really sort of open to people, but it's so undiscovered. And there is a sense of freedom there. I remember my son and I walking across one of the bogs by the lake barefoot and feeling the October mud coming up through our toes and just reveling in the sound of the birdsong and the deer on the hill, and to know that all this amazing work is being done there, Sammy, incredible. So thank you.
There's lots more to do. We're only just starting.
Like, I can't wait to be back. I will be back as quickly as I can. And hopefully the crowds, after people listening to this podcast, I still get first dibs at the door. If you see me showing up, I got there first. So I'm sorry, you have to let me in first. Thank you, Sammy, for your time and giving us a bit of a glimpse of this magical queendom.
Well, you're very welcome, and it's going to be an amazing journey over the next few years, and I hope lots of people come on board. Absolutely.
I cannot wait to see what you're doing, what you do with the Ecological Educational Centre, what you do with the autism projects. It's going to be fascinating.
And I'm just sorry you're not here on Friday when the architects are here.
I know, particularly so one of those architects is a mate of mine, and I do not get to raise a glass with you two, but I will hold it in credit for the next time I'm there.
It's only the beginning.
Yeah.
No,
all right.
Thank you for sending him our way.
Thank you. Sleep well, rest well.
I will.
Okay.
I will.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Join our website, newtrailslearning.com, to check out our online courses and live workshops in Horseboy Method, Movement Method, and Athena. These evidence-based programs have helped children, veterans, and people dealing with trauma around the world. We also offer a horse training program and self-care program for riders on longridehome.com. These include easy-to-do online courses and tutorials that bring you and your horse joy. For an overview of all shows and programs, go to rupertisaacson.com. See you on the next show. And please remember to press subscribe and share.